On Saturday here in New York City on Roosevelt Island, Hillary Clinton formally announced she's running for president. And a couple of really interesting things happened, during that speech and during her announcement. There was a video that the campaign released to coincide with the announcement called Fighter. And that video prominently featured a woman named Marian Wright Edelman, who is a child rights advocate and someone who since the 1960s, 1970s has played a role in fighting poverty and overcoming racism and overcoming specifically child poverty and child abuse issues. Hillary Clinton worked for her in the 1970s and considered her a political mentor. This is an incredibly important person in Hillary Clinton's life. And in 1996, when Bill Clinton signed, quote unquote, welfare reform, which was a brutal Republican written bill that passed a far-right Republican Congress with many Democratic supporters. President Clinton signed this bill into law, and Marian Wright Edelman was disgusted. And that led to a rupture between her and the Clintons that really went on through 2008. I don't recall whether or not she endorsed Barack Obama, but she certainly was not sort of involved in that campaign on behalf of Hillary Clinton, and has been very critical of the Clintons on children's and poverty issues. Now, she was prominently featured in this video, and the mission was to recreate Hillary Clinton. Someone pointed out that really the political image of Hillary Clinton from the 60s, 70s, and early 80s was really one as a feminist and a progressive and a sort of pioneer in a lot of important social and economic issues, particularly with regards to children and gender. She's tried to run away from that over the last several decades, moving to the right on issues ranging from welfare reform to the invasion of Iraq to the bankruptcy bill. And clearly she's trying to re-anchor herself in that political tradition. And she said some really good things, but there's still some big warning signs. But let's take a listen to a clip of Hillary. She's talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and promising to follow in his footsteps with his sort of four kind of core premises of progressive governance. This is during Hillary Clinton's announcement speech on Saturday. Let's take a listen.
President Roosevelt called on every American to do his or her part, and every American answered. He said, "There's no mystery about what it takes to build a strong and prosperous America. Equality of opportunity, jobs for those who can work, security for those who need it, the ending of special privilege for the few, the preservation of civil liberties for all, a wider and constantly rising standard of living." That still sounds good to me.
That's a really good line, and she's absolutely right. Now, unfortunately, we got to get to the question marks here. I mean, one question mark is obviously, particularly on civil liberties, that's not an issue where Hillary Clinton even has a sort of particularly strong early career or early history to call back to. And she certainly has not taken a stand on reining in NSA, radical and real reform of things like the Patriot Act. So very little to offer there so far. We'll see what happens. And then, even as she has come out with some great proposals on voting rights, on criminal justice reform, on paid parental leave, which is an absolute must, obviously. She's talked about raising the minimum wage. She's taken some real steps. But the fight and the kind of core defining place for inequality, for corporate power, for all of these defining issues right now has been the fight on TPP. And Hillary Clinton has not taken a stand until this weekend on that fight. And it's been very muddled and problematic. So first, what happened over the weekend is you had one of Hillary's advisors, Joe Benison, was on, I think it was ABC. We don't have the clip. I just am sort of going to go over what he said, basically. And his argument was, we're not debating TPP yet, basically. This whole debate is about fast-track authority, and that's inside baseball that Americans don't care about. Well, that's incredibly disingenuous, because anybody that knows and follows this fight knows that the vote on fast-track is the precursor and the necessary first step for a TPP, a straight up or down vote on a bill that has no transparency, that favors the corporate sector, that has enormous problems for the environment and for labor. Every time something has emerged with this bill or been leaked, it has reinforced the fear of environmental, labor, and public health groups. So that's what we know. And fast track would accelerate a non-transparent process and sort of lock in this really just corporate regulatory framework, which is what TPP is. So her advisor coming out and saying that's inside baseball is very disingenuous. Hillary then came out and basically said, look, she stands with Nancy Pelosi, which is interesting because Pelosi, as we know, she kind of reversed herself. Pelosi was apparently quietly behind the scenes whipping very hard to back President Obama in getting fast-track authority and back the TPP, even though she wasn't necessarily going to vote for it. But in the last minute herself, she voted against the trade assistance funding, which was, of course, the other key vote, because if trade assistance got for workers that are dislodged by these trade deals, if that got voted down, that would basically make it impossible for even very right-leaning Democrats to vote for this bill. Pelosi voted against it, and she said, look, let's take the time to make this bill. Let's make TPP better for American workers. And Hillary came out and said that's what she supports. She stands with Nancy Pelosi. So she said, quote, this is what Hillary said in Iowa over the weekend. The president, quote, the president should listen and work with his allies in Congress, starting with Nancy Pelosi, who've expressed their concerns about the impact of that a weak agreement would have on workers, and make sure we get the best and strongest deal possible. And if we don't get it, there should be no deal. So that's strong stuff. I mean, that's some very mixed messages. Obviously, Hillary and the Clintons have a history of strongly supporting everything from NAFTA to WTO, to the GATT framework, to permanent normalized trade relations with China, which was a major debate that took place in the late 1990s, and a similar dynamic where it was Bill Clinton and mainly Republicans teaming up against the more progressive Democrats. But the main takeaway is that clearly the dynamic has been pushed in such a direction that she's needed to move there and take some critical steps. But we'll see. I mean, Barack Obama was a strong critic of corporate regulatory frameworks disguised as trade agreements when he ran for president, and we've seen how that's turned out. So the best step right now is obviously to keep pushing. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is completely unequivocal about this and right about it. And then the other questions that remain are, look, we already have individual trade agreements with many of these specific countries. It's not clear why this is such an overwhelming strategic and economic importance right now, especially given the actual challenges we face.